The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Monday edition of the Whitfield Report podcast. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here at Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida. And happy June. It is the first of the month, so welcome to the show and welcome to a new season almost as well, since we are quickly heading into summer. Real quick, just want to apologize for the lack of shows last week. Since last Monday was Memorial Day, I decided to take the holiday off, as I hope most of you did as well, to enjoy the holiday and remember those who have given all for our great nation. But then also on Wednesday, we were supposed to have a guest, and then that guest had to cancel at the very last minute. And also, Max had technical issues that kind of came up at the last minute as well. So with those two things in mind and kind of no show planned outside of the guest, I decided to, just kind of call it a night and take Wednesday evening off. And, every once in a while it is kind of good to take a Wednesday off and just chill and hang out. And in my case, I, had plenty of time to play 007 First Light, which came out last week as well. And I know that many of you have seen my review that I wrote on Substack and X for 007 First Light, so I really appreciate everyone who has checked out my review of 007 First Light. And, as I said in that review, I really do feel like 007 First Light really is almost a perfect Bond video game. I would rank it 9.5 out of 10, honestly. It's a great Bond, not just video game, but a great Bond story in general. So, as I mentioned before, I wrote a spoiler-free review over on Substack and X that's available for everyone to read. And I will be writing a more in-depth spoiler-filled review, either later this weekend, later this week / weekend, / next week. Just depending on when I get into it. I want to replay the game and, replay certain parts a bit, to kind of, go over the plots a bit in some areas and, give my take on some more specifics regarding the, the plot and whatnot. But overall, I thought it was really good. However, and this is kind of the topic of today's show. There were a lot of people online who, for some reason, were complaining that the game was somehow woke and whatnot. Now, I want to back up here a sec and kind of contextualize that, for the last couple months, really, for the last, year, couple years, ever since 007 First Light was first announced by IOI Interactive, I've said on my show numerous times as a lifelong James Bond fan that I was concerned that, with Amazon taking things over and and a new, game development studio taking over the games, there were legitimate concerns that 007, whatever the video game might be, was going to be woke or somehow subverted, or deconstructed. Because we've lived, really for the past decade plus in an era where a lot of media, and especially in video games, has been hijacked kind of by the woke mob, right? We have countless examples of this from, The Last of Us, most prominently in gaming, that, that's kind of like peak wokeness, in video games. I'm thinking of, the Star Wars sequel trilogy, especially The Last Jedi, was peak wokeness, and it, got to the point where it kind of more or less destroyed Star Wars, and tanked interest in the franchise, and Disney really hasn't really recovered from it since then, honestly. So we do have examples of, wokeness and subversion and deconstruction, destroying beloved franchises and, turning them into things that we don't recognize. And there was initially that fear with 007 First Light. As I mentioned, it's not completely unfounded. In fact, many 007 fans, myself included, were kind of disappointed with the last few movies of the Daniel Craig era. They weren't horribly woke as a whole, but a lot of the later Craig films, and I mentioned this in my spoiler-free review of 007 First Light, really the last three Craig movies, even going back to like Skyfall, which I generally enjoyed as a whole, they started to do this thing where you had Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, Daniel Craig's first two movies, which really, if you put them together, they make up one entire film, and that's Bond's origin story, from Casino Royale, how he becomes a 00 agent, and it kind of his first adventure as 007, adapting the original Ian Fleming novel, which everyone loved. Quantum of Solace, was weak and kind of left people, myself included, wanting, for more. Although it has aged better comparably as the years have gone by somewhat, especially if you consider it more or less like a direct sequel to Casino Royale. And then, Skyfall is a pretty good film overall. However, I would say that that's really when things kind of started to maybe start to show signs of where they were going with wanting to deconstruct Bond, because Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace serve as an origin story, for Bond, where he's, still a young agent and kind of inexperienced, finding his way, kind of through the world of spycraft as a first timer, and also as as an assassin, kind of making his bones. But then you get to Skyfall, and they make a dramatic jump in time where Bond's been on the job for, a few years at this point. More than a few years, it seems, kind of like how they were writing Skyfall. And he gets shot during an operation, and the entire movie at certain points kind of starts to focus on Bond getting older. Bond, maybe doesn't have as much of an edge as he did, when he was younger, which granted happens to all of us, but, they really focused on that in Skyfall, which I thought was jarring a bit because, in the previous movie, he's, still a kind of a young, brand new double agent. And then, like, in Craig's, third film, they're already talking about, well, maybe Bond should be put out to pasture. And they continued that trend with Spectre, which is regrettably kind of like, meh, you can skip that one. And then No Time to Die, it wasn't horrible, but, everyone knows that film as Craig's final film, and also, most notably, the one where Bond dies. Yes, they literally kill Bond off at the end of No Time to Die. He doesn't get a happy ending. And it's the end of an era. And a lot of people were worried that it was going to be the end of James Bond as a whole. And that's not really, the way that you want a legacy character like Bond going out. So all that is to say that there was, tremendous concern when Amazon took over, and there still kind of is, with the film at least, that Amazon is going to continue more of this, like, kind of deconstructionist slash woke treatment of 007, for lack of a better term. And when it was announced that the video game 007 First Light was being developed by IO Interactive and would kind of be the first project to come out once Amazon took over the Bond franchise, there were definitely people who were worried about, what that could mean for the future, myself included. So all that is to say that, like, the concerns were not unfounded. For sure, I think there were legitimate fears, at least as far as the video game industry, has been concerned, especially with the gaming industry's track record over the past decade plus, that this game might be woke. But at the same time, IO Interactive Studios, the people who created Hitman, like, they have a pretty solid track record with that game of making good games, and games that, at least in my experience, largely tend to avoid kind of the politicalization of everything that happens in culture. So I was cautiously optimistic, um, from the get-go. But, still kind of nervous at times. And then last year, kind of as we got close to release time and some people started to play, the game a bit and started to hear things, like people in the Bond community who I know who are just as diehard of fans as I am, especially like this year, some of them got to play the game early. And I knew, and I don't know all of them like directly, but I know people who know them directly. And the one thing I was told is, Sam, I know you don't pre-order games a lot, and I know you're kind of nervous about this game, but trust me, from everything I've heard, you're going to love this, and this is going to be worth it. And I talked a bit about this, in my spoiler-free review, but that's basically what happened. I went in with super low expectations for 007 First Light, and I played through the campaign, for the first time, and like I think it may have been like 2.5, not quite, 2 days, but like not quite 3 days either. Kind of like 2.5, 2 and 2/3 days that it took me to beat the campaign first time through. And I kept expecting there to be some, uh, you know, moment where the shoe drops and the toxic white male is, the bad guy, and, Bond gets like outsmarted by, uh, a token insert character and all that, or, something like that. But nothing like that ever happened. Not only that, but like, man, in this game, Bond is like, somewhat cocky because he's a younger guy. He's very sure of himself. He's got like, what we call on the internet like chud energy, where he's just, he's confident. He's got, some of his, fellow MI6 recruits. One of them is like a total, kind of just like a cool dude who you can chill out with in the first few levels at least. Not to, give too many spoilers, but there's that, and then the Bond girls in this game. My God, I mean, folks, this is the opposite of, the uglification of women in games, right? Like, we had that, even just like, 2 or 3 years ago in games where, uh, these beautiful women, these beautiful models would kind of be dumbed down a bit in games and kind of uglified to look more like, plain Jane or more normalized. Not in this game. Oh no. Uh, they had hot Bond girls basically out the wazoo in this game. And so a lot of us, were happy about that. In fact, just to show you guys what I mean, there's this clip that's been going around the internet of Bond girl Teresa Lorca, who she plays a minor part in the games, but very fun nonetheless.
John?
Oh, she's fine.
She certainly is.
John?
Drinking alone was never my forte.
Well, I didn't realize you were this thirsty.
Parched, actually. You were free diving.
Being a marine biologist comes in handy.
Oh, what's your number?
Chasing a 6 at the moment.
6. Very impressive.
Uh-huh. Yep, that is your Bond girl for 26. Definitely Game of the Year material and Girl of the Year material as well. And so, yeah, is this Bond game woke? I think not, ladies and gentlemen. I think not. Nevertheless, though, there are people online complaining that despite Miss Teresa Lorca and other Bond girls making an appearance like this, there are those who still want to say that this game is still somehow woke. And what is their evidence for this? Well, their evidence basically seems to be that M is a female, and also they seem to be upset that she's also a woman of English and Indian descent. And that alone, according to some people, somehow makes this game woke. And they don't like it. Now, this is completely dumb for a few reasons. One, M was famously played by Judi Dench for years. She's the M that many people in my generation grew up with as M. I always grew up thinking that M was always a woman until I watched the Sean Connery movies when I was like 11 and 12. And then I, found out that no, M had in fact been a guy up until Brosnan's era. And then, yeah, she was brought in as the new M. And, I would say all of the M's are iconic, but like, I think a lot of people from my generation would kind of agree that Judi Dench's M is especially iconic for many of us. Right? So we have had a female M before. As far as M being a woman of English Indian descent, well, it kind of makes sense, ladies and gentlemen, because India used to be a British colony about 100 years ago. And so, yes, there are many British citizens of Indian ethnicity. So, like, the idea that M would be a proper, uh, English raised, uh, English schooled, basically, subject of the crown or whatever, but with a, of Indian heritage, that makes complete sense. And this M in the game, like, she doesn't, make a big deal about her race, like, at all. It's not really a thing. If you you can read up on her character bio, and she has a pretty, like, extensive, background in the military and intelligence, things that you would, kind of want, like, an M to be schooled in. Right? So the fact that she's a woman of color really has no effect on the story whatsoever, ever. And yet, some people in the anti, woke crowd want to complain about that. Same thing with, Moneypenny. Moneypenny is, uh, you know, is is kind of like a dark skinned, IT nerd, essentially, who gives Bond, advice in his ear during missions and whatnot, and kind of points Bond slash the player in possible ways to go. And she also gives Bond, grief about, being, somewhat of a horn dog and whatnot, not being like demeaning or anything like that. Not really like acting insulted or anything like that. But just like giving him crap about it, right? Which has kind of always been the way that Moneypenny has been historically. Uh, sh if not, she's usually giving Bond, like, a hard time, if not outright kind of flirting with, Bond herself, right? Now, this Moneypenny doesn't really do that, at least not, in this game, but she does kind of bust Bond's chops a bit, which is not unusual for the character. And yet, there are some people who, like, honestly, I don't think they're Bond fans at all, who were, decrying the fact that she was busting Bond's chops as, like, somehow being woke or something, right? And this kind of leads me to my overall point, ladies and gentlemen. We're at a point in the culture now, right? We've kind of had this, we've kind of like this, 10 to 15 year culture war at this point, where it's like woke versus non-woke. And initially the woke side wanted to make a big deal out of, everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything's homophobic, and all needs to be, torn down and, destroyed and kind of rebuilt. And if you don't like the fact that, there are 6 female Ghostbusters and some of them are, lesbians and whatnot, and that's their only, personality trait, well then you're just a bigot, right? And if you don't like the diverse, woman of color character in XYZ video game or property, who has no redeeming, character quality other than that, well, again, you're just a bigot. And so on and so forth. That's what a lot of people were, dealing with, kind of this woke fatigue. And, a lot of the kind of pushback against that was justified. And in fact, a lot of people on the internet made careers out of pushing back against the woke mentality. And this is where things get interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Because those same people who made careers out of, pushing back against the woke mind virus, so to speak, some of them now are the same people who they are so anti-woke that in a weird way they've kind of become woke themselves, right? Where it's not just enough for them to say that they don't like the new James Bond video game, or they personally didn't like it. No, they have to tell you that M being a woman of color is somehow woke just for being woman. And also Teresa Lork, well, she's not as hot as some other Bond girls have been in the past, so therefore that's also woke as well. And they nitpick all these various things with the plot. They don't like the fact that Bond has a black mentor in the game, played by Lenny James, who I thought did a fantastic job. And I don't want to go too much into his character in this, because that'll be more for spoiler territory. But overall, a lot of these kind of anti-woke critics, they may have been valuable 5-10 years ago, but this game is not woke at all, right? Which is what a lot of them were banking on. They were banking on that this was going to be another woke video game that they could make 10 to 15 videos on how it was woke, and gin up more outrage in the comments and get more clicks and more views and more Patreon subscribers, etc., etc. And when this game wasn't woke at all, when it actually in some ways turned out to be anti-woke, that wasn't good enough for them. So they started to do things like basically try and break the game. They would try and get Bond to walk outside, borders of the game to glitch the map and say, "Oh, this game is broken," or they would have Bond running around in circles around a table and have the NPC enemy AI chase after him repetitively. There's been this thing where some of the people have been super critical. They've had Bond walk through a clothesline of bed sheets or whatever, and because the bed sheet doesn't I guess flow over Bond completely or something like that, or do some sort of thing, they think that the game is broken, right? So just really stupid and really kind of petty things. Which kind of brings me to my point of I think at this point, right, people have woke fatigue for sure. But on the flip side, I think people also have like anti-woke fatigue. Me too, because me included, because it's like, okay, well, in the case of Double 007 First Light, like, we basically got a game that had everything that like hardcore Bond fans like myself wanted. It wasn't woke. It had fun gameplay mechanics. It had hot Bond girls. You can drive fast cars. It had a really good story. Maybe not the most groundbreaking story, but hey, um, you know, not everything needs to be like groundbreaking, or brand new. Sometimes a good by the numbers 007 adventure is just what you need. I would say, in fact, after like 6 years without Bond, it is what we need, and we kind of need it, as like a fresh kind of, you know, reboot coming off kind of the depressing end of the Daniel Craig era. Right? So hardcore Bond fans such as myself love this, and yet the supposed anti-woke crowd, they still find ways to, to disparage this game and hate on it, which, by the way, is their that's their right to do, and whatnot. If you don't like a game or whatever, that's fine. But again, I think a lot of it is people just trying to generate for clicks, and that's it. Like, I honestly don't think that like a lot of these quote unquote, you know, uh woke or anti-woke commentators really even cared about, the Bond video game. They just wanted things to complain about on both ends of the spectrum. And it's very telling. And I think people, like I said, are kind of done with it, more or less. The normal gamer just wants a good, solid video game, which, IO Interactive, in my opinion, they delivered a solid video game. And that's what people want out of entertainment in general. People are getting so tired of the is this woke versus is this not woke conversation. People just want good entertainment at the end of the day. They want something, whether that be a video game, a movie, a television show, where they can kind of kick their feet up at the end of the day and just enjoy something. Same thing with books too. That was one of the reasons why I started writing the Shadows of Deception saga and books, like American Inferno, right? I was one of the people who was very kind of disappointed in kind of the deconstruction era of 007 and James Bond, right? But rather than start a YouTube channel and, our podcast where I just complained endlessly about how Bond was woke, I decided to kind of, in my own way, take matters into my own hands, and I created a character of my own, John Ryder, and we have the Shadows of Deception, saga. This is book number 5, American Inferno, my latest in the Shadows of Deception saga. And, kind of follows him. He's kind of my American version of James Bond. And I actually have a piece coming out on my Substack tomorrow specifically about how Bond has influenced Ryder in the past, and kind of how Bond's DNA is a part of Ryder's character in general. And I also have this prequel novella that just came out, Blood in the Jungle, which focuses on John Ryder's father, James Ryder, a Vietnam veteran. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing. Rather than just complaining at woke versus non-woke media, I'm actually creating media of my own because I know that people want, to be entertained at the end of the day. And that all of this identity politics stuff is just secondary. So yeah, I think people are done with the woke versus anti-woke, rhetoric online. They just want to be entertained at the end of the day. That's why independent media is great, like what I'm doing and like what a lot of indie authors in my circle are doing. And, thankfully it's great that, bigger companies like IO Interactive are making good quality games that are just purely there to entertain people. And I hope that Amazon really learns their lesson from, kind of the Lord of the Rings debacle that they had a few years ago, and just makes a 007 movie that is kind of free of all this stuff, and really just makes a Bond movie for the fans. That's really all we want at the end of the day. So yeah. But anyway, that'll do it for this Monday's podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing too serious. I just kind of wanted to go over the woke versus anti-woke, subculture, and how Bond really at the end of the day is a litmus test for this type of thing, especially with 007 First Light. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, check out the Shadow of Deception saga in my newest book, my newest novel, American Inferno, available on Amazon, and also my new novella, Blood in the Jungle, also available now. And if you like my work, consider, leaving a 5-star review on Amazon, and also consider leaving a, review for this podcast as well. I'll be back for the Wednesday show live with Max and Morpheus at 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday night. But until then, have a good evening, and God bless, God save this great nation, God, freedom, legacy, in that order.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.